Good evening. Viewers who have followed so far the series of historical sketches may perhaps be surprised that we have changed the title of the series from historical sketches to the history of Europe in the 19th century. And this is not a change in the so-called philosophy of the series, which is the philosophy of the series, that is to offer a selection of events and characters who have had a significant influence on the age when they lived. Selection, of course, supplemented by factual or anecdotal reference to the life of some of the protagonists. With this new distinct series, however, the focus is specifically on the 19th century. Now, some historians have written about the last century, the 20th, already rendered distant by the inaudible and noiseless foot of time, as Shakespeare would say, and they called it the short century, and others have called it the long century. And similar contrasting attributes have been used to describe the history of the 19th century, which is why we will dedicate this first installment of the history of Europe not directly to the events, the protagonists, the people of the 19th century, but rather we will talk about the characteristics, at least some of them, that make history controversial. Characteristics or aspects, if you like, that ought to be kept in mind when dealing with a subject so easy to understand in principle. After all, history is simply what happened in the past. And yet, the subject becomes quite elusive when we begin, even mildly, to dig beneath the surface of the first ideas that come to mind when we use the word history. However, given the title of this new series within the series, I will at least mention the main themes we will be dealing with in the next episodes, namely the Napoleonic adventure and its glory, its crash and its aftermath, the attempt to restore the old world order at the famous Congress of Vienna in 1815, the birth of the nationalist movements across Europe, the end of absolute monarchical rule with the establishment of the constitutions in the newly formed nations throughout Europe, the growth of the class struggle and the attempt to deal with it. That is, how national liberal revolutions acted as a kind of conduit for attempts at social revolutions and counter-revolutions. The unification of Germany into an empire. The complex international equilibrium arising out of so many new independent and ambitious nations at the end of the century. And finally, the conditions that brought about World War I. But, as I said, let's consider the ingredients that convert such a simple concept as history into a branch of knowledge in its own rights, with its own schools, colleges, universities, practitioners, researchers, teachers, writers, and followers. Now, if you, the viewer, happen to be a historian already, some of the ideas we will talk about here will be familiar to you. But even so, as we will delve into the history of Europe proper, you may disagree with some of the conclusions. And your potential disagreement will be perfectly justified. In fact, when we agree or disagree about a historical judgment or a historical conclusion, we do so not necessarily because we know more about what happened in that particular instance, but because our interpretation of the event reflects our current ideology or, more in general, our worldview. Which brings us to say that when we attempt to answer the question, what is history, our answer, consciously or unconsciously, reflects our own position in time and form part of our answer to a broader question, namely, what view we take of society and what view we take of the time in general, time in when we live. Consider, for example, this book that I have here, which is Napoleon For and Against. It was written about 70 years ago, and it collects different historians' opinions about Napoleon I. And as the title of the book implies, half of the historians agree that Napoleon was a genius and did a lot of good for France and for mankind in general, as he embodied the spirit of the French Revolution. For the other half, Napoleon was but an instrument of the devil, and the world would be a much better place if he had never been born. Yet, the facts about Napoleon are well known, and the documentation about his life and his exploits is extensive and reliable. But even if more documents were to be found, the striking dichotomy in judgment would remain the same. We can almost be sure about that. Now, I said that historical judgments about people and events are a function of the ideology of him who passes the judgment. Is this the only criterion then? Not necessarily. And here is an example expressed in verses, and the poet is the English novelist, poet and playwright Thomas Hardy, the Romantic writer who lived most of his life in the 19th century and who made the English Wessex countryside popular. His name will be familiar to our viewers, as some of his novels have been turned into masterpiece theatre production on the television. And in one of the plays, one character appropriately called the Spirit Sinister, he says, "My argument is that war makes rattling good history, but peace is poor reading. So I back Bonaparte for the reason that he will give pleasure to posterity." Transported to our present day, that would be a good argument to favor, for example, the war in Iraq, with the almost 5,000 dead American soldiers, very many wounded, often left to die with horrible suffering or committing suicide, not to count the 1 million plus Iraqis killed for being guilty of living where they were born. But war, as Thomas Hardy said, makes rattling good history. Now, let's go back to our consideration. We can safely conclude that a facts-based history, a history based on facts, is an illusion. And we can quote the Italian playwright Pirandello, who said that a fact is like a sack. It won't stand up till you have put something in it. Or if we wish to be even more extreme, we can quote the philosopher Nietzsche, who said that there are no facts, but only interpretations. Which is one of the reasons why history does not read like the Yellow Pages, where instead of the name and the address of the commercial concerns, there should be the dates of wars, battles, intrigues, revolts, revolutions, and major players thereof. Which is not to diminish the importance of the Yellow Pages of history. In fact, just to quote an example, historian Ludovico Muratori, who lived between 1744 and 1749, wrote the Annals of Italian History in 12 volumes, from the birth of Christ to his days. And for each of these 1749 years that he reviewed, there is an accurate list of everything that happened or has been known to happen in that particular year. Facts, or in this case annals, are invaluable as a reference, of course, because if you are interested or if you become interested in knowing more about a certain period of history, or for the matter a nation or a people, soon you will be dealing with a multitude of characters, events, and anecdotes to the point of losing your way, so to speak. And at that moment, it is good to have a place where you can find dates, milestones, battles, wars, treaties. In other words, it's good to have some kind of yellow pages of history. A recent instance of the influence of historical interpretation is what happened with the book, the well-known book, The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, who died in 2010. Zinn has been ostracized, maligned, and vilified. And, for example, the former governor of Indiana, Mitch Daniels, who is now president, by the way, of Purdue University, did even try to remove the book from all the schools of the states. And when Zinn died, said, "This terrible anti-American academic has finally passed away." And of the book he said, "This crap should not be accepted for any credit by the state." But why? Why, you may ask, and you can answer yourself. Howard Zinn offered a view of American history contrary to the canons considered proper in this, which is our time. He started with Christopher Columbus, and the celebrated discovery of the New World, the legend and the myths associated with it. Reference is also made in the book. Reference is made to Bartolomé de las Casas, who was the Spanish priest who was horrified and who documented the barbaric treatment of the natives by the so-called conquistadores, the conquerors. And regrettably for Mitch Daniels, Howard Zinn did not just offer theories. He documented, if you like, what he said by quotations from the original authors. And here is, for example, what Father de las Casas said. "Yet into this sheepfold, unto this land of meek outcasts, there came some Spaniards, who immediately behaved like ravening wild beasts, wolves, tigers, or lions that had been starved for many days, killing, terrorizing, afflicting, torturing, and destroying the native peoples, doing all this with the strangest and most varied new methods of cruelty, never seen or heard before, and to such a degree that this island of Hispaniola, which by the way is today occupied by the Dominican Republic and Haiti, once so populous, having a population that I estimated to be more than 3 millions, has now a population of barely 200 persons. The reason for killing and destroying such an infinite number of souls is that the Christians have an ultimate aim, which is to acquire gold and to swell themselves with riches in a very brief time, and thus rise to a high estate disproportionate to their merits. And it should be kept in mind their insatiable greed and ambition, the greatest ever seen in the world, is the cause of their villainies. And also, these lands are so rich and felicitous, the native people so meek and patient, so easy to subject, that our Spaniards have no more considerations for them than beasts, no more, not for thanks be to God, they have treated beasts with some respect. I should say instead like excrement on the public squares. So went Bartolomé de las Casas. But why Daniels, dean of a famous university, should so obviously object to academic freedom? Worse, object to the popularization of the observations of people from the past of America. Why should he? After all, There is nothing scandalous, prurient, or even particularly extraordinary in bringing to evidence what some people documented about their own experiences of what, for us, is the past. And he said, we must not falsely teach American history in our books, he said to the Associated Press, which may be a proposition as good as any, as long as you define the meaning of words, in the instance, what is false and what is true. And it is easy to see that in the case at hand, what is false or true about American history is what Daniels says it is. Now, Daniels couldn't care less about what I think or what you think, but in his position, he well knows that the ideas inculcated or gathered in youth make the strongest impressions. Many, of course, will go through life without ever questioning what they were first taught to believe at schools, including matters about American history. Therefore, we can quickly see the danger to the status quo, which after all has historical being the constant goal of those who achieve the status they wish to maintain. In the instance, the history of Dean Daniels, the history that he approves of, is one designed not to instill potentially dangerous ideas, dangerous to the status quo, or in the case of Daniels, the status that he himself enjoys. In the same vein of thought, there is indeed such thing as a philosophy of history. And actually the term was invented by Voltaire in the 18th century. And philosophy of history probably is or could be a good answer to the question, what is history? History, or the philosophy of it, is more prosaically what we think of it. As we will see in the next episodes, the 19th century was, for the intellectuals of Western Europe, a comfortable period exuding confidence and optimism. The facts were on the whole satisfactory, and the inclination to ask and answer awkward questions about these facts was weak. The historian Otto Ranke, for example, believed that the hand of providence would take care of the meaning of history if he himself, as a historian, took care of the facts. And this confidence in the hands of providence to make sense of history brings to mind the sentence that by Adam Smith in the 18th century, 100 years before, when he made reference to the magic hand of the market, a concept, by the way, of the magic hand of the market, taken out of context and horribly misquoted to justify, among other things, extreme neoliberal economics, or some call it turbo-capitalism. Indeed, the liberal 19th century's view of history had a close affinity with the economic doctrine of laissez-faire. Let everyone go on with his business, and the hidden hand, presumably of providence, would take care, or will take care, of universal harmony. All this brings us to several conclusions. All history is a history of thought, and history is the reenactment in the historian's mind of the thought he is studying the history of. There can be no objective, or if you like, unbiased history. If nothing else, language itself prevents the historian from being neutral. Take the case of Ukraine, for example, now center stage in the struggle for power. Without going into details, a historian who were to call the independentists of southeast Ukraine terrorists cannot obviously be neutral. And yet interpretations, as we said before, the lifeblood of history. A historian without facts is futile, useless, but facts without historians are equally dead and meaningless. But then, if you may say, if the interpretations are the lifeblood of history, it follows that the historian itself is part of history, which indeed is what led the 20th century philosopher Benedetto Croce to write that all history is contemporary history, meaning that history consists essentially in seeing the past through the eyes of the present and in light of its problems. And that the main work of the historian is not to record, but to evaluate. And if we think about it, if he does not evaluate, how can he know what it is worth recording? But I would not like to give the impression that history is all just about facts, interpretation, and controversies. There is a lighter side of history, and there is also, if you like, a cinematographic side of history. And it is the task of a good historian to bring out the facts and their interpretation in a light analogous to the story of a good thriller. Remember, all the world is a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and each man plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages, as Shakespeare did say. Let's take an example known probably to most of the viewers, the plot of The Godfather. Some mafia characters kill a young boy's father in Sicily. The boy barely escapes with his life and travels to America, where later he kills a prominent, domineering, and exploitative neighborhood boss. This killing establishes the Godfather's reputation, who goes on to build a successful business and a family enterprise. He then becomes embroiled in a turf war with other rivals, during which he is ambushed and almost killed. His aim to buy access to the status of a revered family, respected by the non-criminal establishment, fails. His martyred son takes up the challenge of restoring the fortunes of the family through a well-planned execution of various rivals. This abstract in itself would not prompt you to read the book or watch the movie. But now, what makes The Godfather such a success? It is the interweaving of personal life stories with events that have a ring of truth, or at least a ring of credibility. And the historian has a similar task: to select components, people, events, accidents, and anecdotes out of the chronicles of the period that he is covering, select them, and try to make them interesting. But there is a major difference. In the movie, all the images, or if you like, the graphics, are provided ready-made, along with the background music to create a mood suitable to the flow of events. But when you read a book, you become yourself the movie producer. You provide the landscape out of the landscapes you may have seen in person, or furnish a room based on the description of the author that gives of the room, but also that you can complete with some room that you can visualize with your imagination. You create your impression of a character, of what he looks like, how he behaves, character drawn in part, again, from your knowledge of people that may bear some resemblance to those about whom you are reading. And then there is the great wealth of anecdotes that define the characters. For example, most people do not know that Napoleon was arrested and imprisoned for being a friend of Robespierre, who was perhaps somewhat too harshly associated with the terror, simply because his ideas went against the godfathers of the revolution at the time. And it is by mere chance that Napoleon escaped having his head cut off at the guillotine. And the saucy letters that he wrote to his first wife, Josephine Beauharnais, seem out of character with the imposing image offered to us by his contemporaries and painters. What happened at his second marriage, for example, gives us another insight on his character. His second wife was, as you may recall, none the less than Marie-Louise of Austria, daughter of the Emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The marriage had been concluded by proxy, by correspondence, we would say today. Diplomatic correspondence, of course. Napoleon went to meet her at the border between France and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. A wedding banquet, assembling all the ambassadors and all the bigwigs and all the king's men of the time, had been prepared. Bigwigs and ambassadors, of course, of France and Austria and other countries. When everything was ready to begin, Napoleon and the Empress were nowhere to be seen, and the delay, you can imagine, seemed interminable. And it just so happened that Napoleon wanted to consummate the marriage before doing anything else. And we may surmise that a bit of pride went into the occasion, for he was an upstart from an obscure Corsican family who succeeded in marrying into one of the great imperial families of the time. He had made it, we could say, in more than one way. And then there is also in history what Bertrand Russell calls curious learning. For example, take the apricots. They were first cultivated in China in the early days of the Han dynasty, and they were imported into India by Chinese hostages of the king Kanisha. And from there they spread to Persia, and they reached the Roman Empire in the 1st century AD. The word apricot is derived from the same Latin source as the word precocious, because the apricot ripens early. And the letter A at the beginning of apricot was added by mistake due to a false etymology. And all this, says Bertrand Russell, makes the fruit taste sweeter. This is the end of our introduction to the history of Europe in the 19th century. I thank the crew, as usual, and as always, our director, Kat Iverson. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Good night.